If you called bull on the Marty Necas trade rumors surrounding the Jets and Canes, you were right. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, like I said, we're kicking off with the announcement that the Marty Necas rumor appears to be pretty bull crap, which I think we all kind of knew, right? The whole suggestion that the Jets were going to offer a package of McGroarty and Perfetti and a pick for Necas, no. I didn't buy that for a second, and I was fairly certain that whatever Saravalli was talking about was just not remotely the case from Winnipeg's side. I could definitely see it being the ask from Carolina, but that is not how Saravalli phrased it. He came up with some bizarre thing about the Jets making this offer, and I can assure you, almost without question, that did not happen. If anything, I'm sure Tulsky was the one who initiated the conversation on Perfetti, because I would imagine the Jets have zero interest on that. So let's talk about the ramifications of that. Obviously, Necas has now extended with Canes, and with the Jets seemingly angling for a future with Perfetti, you know, you do wonder, okay, what is next, right? We'll get into that in just a moment, but before we go any further, just wanted to let you know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because as the playoffs wind down for most sports and the sports stop sporting the way we like them to, FanDuel wants to make this summer still as hot as ever, hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, I think it was pretty obvious almost from the start of the rumor that the Jets were not going for Marty Necas, and a lot of it centered around the fact that Necas had no interest in extending in Winnipeg, and I think that is, entirely fine. If I'm being honest, I'm glad he had no interest in extending, because I had no interest in him extending with the Jets. If he had come to Winnipeg, I honestly think he would have been overpaid. I think it would have been bad, and I just don't think it would have been the kind of fit you would want. Now, if you were trading him for Ehlers, I'd feel a little bit differently about it, but when we're talking about Cole Perfetti, right, a core player of Winnipeg's future and a big-name prospect in McGroarty, I hate that return, right? And I'm pretty sure Carolina was the one trying to drive that conversation. Now, Necas was almost a Sabre, which I find to be kind of funny. I do wonder if at some point the Sabres come back to the Jets, especially about Ehlers. If you're thinking about Necas, I would have to imagine that you're also thinking about Ehlers. And there was a rumor that Buffalo was at one point interested, although maybe that involved that Savoy thing. Maybe that was part of the whole return, and maybe the Jets weren't interested. So lots of interesting ways to look at this. My gut feeling is that at the end of the day, right, Marty is, a decent player. I think he certainly scores a lot, and you'll look at that and think that that's pretty great. But like I have talked about in previous episodes, there are red flags in the scoring profile. And so when the rumor came out that the Jets were the ones offering Perfetti McGroarty plus, I was like, there's just no chance. Not with the way that this team does trades to begin with. When they trade disgruntled players or something, usually they have come out on the better side of those exchanges. There's very few times where I think they've actually lost something. In fact, I would really have to dig for a trade where I think they most absolutely failed to get equal value at least. So overall, I think it's nice that the Jets dodged a bullet. I think it's good that the rumor was false. The next phase is obviously just getting Perfetti locked up. If you can do that, it gives you so much more certainty for the future. Perfetti is one of those players that, again, I've talked about in the past. I view him as a core piece of this roster, somebody who should be part of the team long-term, and I think he is certainly interested in becoming one of Winnipeg's key top sixers, which, can only benefit both parties. Perfetti gets to lock in and be a key player on a playoff contender, and the Jets get one of their core young pieces for the foreseeable future, especially as we're looking at the timelines for Hellebuyck and Scheifele to still remain at the top of their game. But in terms of McGroarty, right, I guess I'm still wondering what the plan is with him. There's been relative radio silence, and I assume everyone's just sort of waiting for something to happen. I'm sure there's background negotiations. I'm sure the Jets have had conversations with McGroarty's camp, but we're not really hearing much in the way of movement, which is interesting. I still wonder at the end of the day if McGroarty just ends up signing with the Jets. I mean, trying to force this move and get out when you actually have a real legit chance to make this roster, I still don't quite understand it. I don't think it was a personal insult that the Jets asked him to maybe wait. I have seen plenty of Jets prospects go through the Moose before. It's not like it's a new occurrence. Now, I get why McGroarty's not happy about it, and I think he's got a pretty fair argument, but by the same token, where else are you going to go that's going to give you top 6 or top 9 deployments as a young prospect on a team that's actually bound for the playoffs? Like, McGroarty can go to almost any team he probably wants to, but most of the ones that he's going to get traded to are rebuilders, which means you're going to spend the first several years of your early 20s on a team that sucks. And if that's the case, what are you even trying to leave Winnipeg for? Like, the Jets might not bring you into the big club immediately, but if you at least give it a good showing in preseason, you can make the case that you'll make that jump sooner than later. So for me, I kind of feel like he overcooked his hand on this one, and it unfortunately hurts everyone involved, but we'll have to see if they can sort of come around to terms. My guess is no. I think this bridge might be burned even worse than the Ehlers Bridge, and it's not like the Ehlers Bridge has a lot of connections left, but at least Nick tends to be a pretty agreeable guy and somebody that, I actually could one day see signing an extension with the Jets, which is more than I can say for, McGroarty signing his ELC. Now, I will say the Ehlers thing is like a 10% chance kind of thing. But the McGroarty thing just feels like a 0% chance at this point, unless something really changes. But I feel like that requires both parties to kind of come to terms and agree that, maybe they have to restart the whole relationship fresh. But given how McGroarty's camp has played this, I suspect that is not going to be the case. But, it is what it is. If he wants out, there's not much you can do. You just have to find the right trade partner and hope that it ends up well. Intriguingly, I keep seeing all of these Habs fans on Twitter talking about it and certainly talking about Laine. It is really funny that they continually try to get Jets players, and they only ever get to see or seem to get the more depth guys, players like Yoel Armia and a few others. Now, in fairness, Armia was pretty decent for them, but aside from that, how many top-end Jets players have you seen go to Montreal? I think the best acquisition they got from Winnipeg was one that they claimed off of waivers, Jonathan Kovacevic. I feel like that's probably the only example I can think of. And Kovacevic is good. I think he's a really solid, second pairing defender, but asking him to be more than that, probably overstating it a little bit. I still think Montreal is in its relative middle stages of the rebuild. And so I think it's important for them not to rush it, which means that they probably shouldn't be trying to trade for players like Laine. Unless they're trying to do a pump and dump, I would be a little cautious about trying to get too aggressive when you still need to build out some of your top-end prospects. They don't always draft that well, and so for Montreal, I think it's really important to make sure that they, get the most value out of their picks that they can. But at least when it comes to the Jets, they tend to not really be able to get their hands on the players Winnipeg has and other teams covet. So that continues to be a very funny relationship, and we'll have to see if at some point McGroarty still ends up in Montreal. Laine ending up in Montreal would be sort of funny, but hopefully he comes back to Winnipeg. That's at least my big dream. Now, speaking of which, I do want to talk about whether or not the Jets still have some surprises in store for this offseason. It's been really quiet recently. We haven't really heard much of anything. Sometimes that means the Jets are preparing an absolute banger, but we'll talk about the odds of that in just a little bit. Before we go too much further, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. Just like building a true contender, you need all the parts and players that you can get your hands on to build your roster to its absolute potential. And likewise, eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge victories. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode as we're just chatting about, obviously, this offseason being pretty quiet, not a lot happening, at least in the public eye. I'm sure the Jets have tried to keep things fairly low-key. There's been a lot of attention on the team this offseason, especially around McGroarty. Everyone seems to want him. Nobody seems to be super interested in paying for him. And I'm sure at some point somebody's going to make an offer that the Jets, frankly, can't refuse. But until then, you might ask yourself, do the Jets have another surprise in store? I was kind of hoping that they would have a free agent surprise in store, and they really didn't. I'll be honest, I think they tended to just do the necessary, which, again, I don't hate. I do sort of wish that there was a little bit more creativity with some of the signings out there, but I also get that the Jets maybe want to improve internally first and kind of figure out what they have before they start making external acquisitions. I think back to Sprong, and that one was sort of an interesting signing for Vancouver. The fact that they've had to talk about his maturity being a thing suggests that maybe there was some locker room discrepancies, but in terms of like other free agents, I mean, there's just not really anyone out there. Again, I've still banged the drum on maybe a Yamamoto or a Zadina in camp. I think one of those guys might have something in the tank, and I would really be interested in the Jets taking a flyer on Zadina in particular. I've talked about Zadina in the past as, he's an effortless skater. I think he's a very creative player, and I think he gets crapped on a lot for stuff that's not necessarily his fault. Was he like the top 10 pick that he was drafted to be? Maybe not. Maybe he has disappointed a bit relative to what his pedigree was. But look, he can still be a serviceable full-time NHLer. And if you're the Jets and you're looking for free found money in like the form of like maybe like an Eeli Tolvanen or something, or Tolvanen, however you pronounce his name, Zadina feels like, for me, a similar kind of prospect, right? A guy who's maybe a little older than most other prospects are, and you have seen him bounce around NHL teams the past few years. But I think that there's a legitimately interesting player still buried underneath years of being saddled with some really high expectations and some bad teams. Whether Zadina would ever really match that potential, at this point, I think that's probably, safe to say it's not going to happen. But I still think he can be a productive player, and especially with Winnipeg needing to get smarter about where they're putting their money and how they're taking gambles. If you ask me, it seems like a pretty low-risk investment that could have some potentially big yields. Now, I'm not sitting here saying Zadina is going to be a 60 or 70-point player, but if you're looking for a guy who might be able to chip in 25 to 30 points total in a middle six or bottom six role and can potentially prove to be a grower for this team, I really can't see why you wouldn't at least offer a contract and see what he's interested in doing. It's not often that you get a top 5, top 10 prospect who has had some NHL struggles, admittedly, but those players don't really come along that often. And if the Jets think that there is something to salvage there, I would certainly be interested in giving it a shot. Yamamoto, I'm a little less keen on. I think Kyler is probably what he is at this point, which is a solid like third or fourth line center, perhaps a winger if you want to play him out wide. He can do that. I don't know that he really brings a lot offensively, but he's okay at what he does in a depth role, and that's probably about what you'd expect from him. But I think if I'm looking at potential for growth, Zadina for me is the guy that I would circle. Now, if the Jets really wanted to go crazy this offseason and do something that's really earth-shattering, obviously, figuring out a way to move Pionk's salary would be the Kickstarter, but then you could start to look at bringing in an Oliver Kylington. Kylington is probably the top free agent D right now on the market, and Oliver, look, he is a lefty, and so you would have to figure out how to work that in. But if you moved Pionk's salary, you could probably put Heinola on the right side, or Heinola on the right side, and then have Kylington sort of occupy maybe the third pairing role behind Sandberg. I think you could run 3 really fun pairings. Maybe you have like Morrissey DeMello, Sandberg, Hanola, or something like that. And then maybe like Shillington Miller. Now, I don't know that this pairing, a Shillington Miller is probably going to be high event for, both teams. But I think that there's the potential to have some really good offensive quarterbacking on the back end. And Shillington would be a really fun player for the Jets. He was really good for the Flames once he finally started to get some game time and came back. And if he does want to get a fresh start somewhere, I think the Jets would be a really cool place. It'd also kind of be a little bit funny because it'd sort of come full circle from a meme from many years ago where, people joked that the Bruins could get Connor, Barzal, and Shillington there, and then they actually got none of them and instead made some very questionable picks at the time. And, Shillington was obviously one of those guys who was a part of that trio, and I think he still has something left in the tank to offer. And in terms of like puck moving ability, skating, and offensive acumen, he is fantastic at that. I think he's a really smart defender. I think he's really creative, and that's the sort of thing the Jets could actually make use of. He also doesn't have like a huge track record of high-level NHL output, so you could consider him a buy low candidate. I don't know what he's looking for. He walked away from Calgary's offer, whatever it was, if they even tendered one, which I'm going to guess that they did. And if he wants a change of scenery, well, hey, the Jets could be that supportive environment. Great fan base, lots of fun players. This could be a place where he sort of rehabs his career a bit and perhaps even gets a chance to maybe quarterback one of our power plays. Hanola and Shillington as your 1-2 offensive punch beyond Morrissey would be pretty nice. You'd have at least an attacking-minded blue liner on every pairing, including Miller. I mean, obviously Miller is a big, like, shoot-first kind of right-sided guy. Shillington may have to temper some of that a little bit and be a little more assertive on the puck, but, I'm certainly willing to find out. As it is, the Jets D has needed a makeover for a while, and, if you move Pionk and you start to open up some real options for players like maybe Shillington, or if you're looking internally, Salamonson, hey, I am all for it. The more mobile and skilled this blue line gets, the better it is for the Jets in general. So this offseason, I'm not really expecting something like that. I think if the Jets were interested in doing that, we probably would have seen something a while back. But sometimes when the Jets don't tell you what they're doing, they surprise you with a big move. They've had a harder time keeping a lid on things recently. I feel like we've heard more from Winnipeg's moves than we have in past seasons. But right now, with the radio silence around McGroarty, around Ehlers, around what they're trying to do about the 2C role, whether they're trying to fix the defense, it leads me to wonder what they're up to. I guess that's my biggest question is, what are the Jets getting themselves into? So hopefully it's something good. I'm hoping that there's a big move somewhere. I'd love to see Winnipeg make a big splash. I don't need them to like acquire a McKinnon or something, but if they really show that they're trying to, build for the present and the future, I think that'd be pretty cool. Not many ways to do that unless you are willing to pony up, but I'll tell you what, if the Jets want to make a big splash with a young player for young player trade, keep thinking about it. McGroarty to Blue Jackets, make it happen. I think that there's a lot that you can work with there. And I think it solves for both sides, maybe hitting multiple birds with a couple of stones, not one stone, but multiple stones. Like I said, you make a Line Jiricek for McGroarty Pionk deal happen, and maybe there's something to that, right? But either way, I just hope that the Jets give us something to go off of. This offseason has really started to grind to a crawl. You've heard me have to really scrounge for some big topics, and it'd be nice if that there's something that Winnipeg shows some ambition with. A lot of their moves at the trade deadline sort of fell through, so I know that they've been busy. Not the trade deadline, but the draft. I know a lot of deals that they were trying to work through with respect to McGroarty ended up not happening, so it's not like they've been completely absent and not working. I just hope that they can actually consummate something at some point and get us some real results, because this team, unfortunately, can't be powered by near misses. They've got to find ways to really make some effective stuff happen and bring in some help, because this team as it is, it's going to have some issues next season is all I can say. But One guy I am sort of hoping to have a big season from is a player who's maybe gone a little bit under the radar. That's Morgan Barron. I've spotlighted him before on previous episodes, in part because I feel like Barron has perhaps flown a little bit under the radar. I know I've talked about, of course, David Gustafson before and some of the other depth players, but Barron, I think, has the most intriguing profile for a guy who basically plays like 11 minutes a night. A guy who scores you like 18 to 20 points doing that while also scoring 11 goals this past season might suggest that there's a real player there, and I sort of want to walk into that a little bit and talk about it in just a brief moment. But before we go too much further, did want to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much that I wished they never ended. But as playoffs wind down, of course, the NHL is over. MLB playoffs are coming up real soon, relatively speaking. And, the Olympics are certainly underway and starting to get into the final events for some of the big ones. Obviously, the sports aren't always sporting the way you want them to, but FanDuel still wants to let you have fun and keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hey friends, and welcome back to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we're just wrapping up talking about some interesting off-season stuff. And I think one thing that I'm keeping an eye on for this upcoming year is what Morgan Barron does for the Winnipeg Jets. I know that he's had a couple of seasons where he's had, the first year, some modest point totals, just 4 and 14. It wasn't like he was looking to be anything particular. But then in his second full season, he had 21 points in 70 games, and 8 of those came off of goals. This year, he had 18 points in 80 games, so a little bit less, but he actually was shooting a little bit more accurately and finishing some really nice chances. In 3 less minutes, he actually scored just 3 points less, which is really impressive, and he finished 11 opportunities, which when you're talking about fourth-line scoring, that is like crazy goal production. That's the kind of goal production I was talking about with Daniel Sprong. And if the Jets are interested in promoting Barron a bit further up the lineup, I really wouldn't hate it, right? Obviously, Niederreiter's probably locked in on that third-line wing spot, but maybe, just maybe, you could try him with Lowry. Maybe Barron and Lowry together could really accomplish something. I think Niederreiter has done very well there, so I'm not really inclined to break it up. But hey, in preseason, when you're trying some new combos and you're maybe looking for some different chemistry, a guy who's shooting like 12-ish% this past season might be worth giving more of a look. And I would say that with Barron, it's not like he was just finishing gimme opportunities. He's a legitimately solid scorer. I feel like he's got some soft hands. I feel like his offensive instincts and positioning are pretty sharp. He'll crash the slot and crease. He'll create his own rebounds and chaos. He's just a good, well-rounded player. And he certainly brings, some okay defensive impact. But I think I'm most interested in his scoring touch and playmaking. I think that there's more there to him than just a fourth liner, and whether or not the Jets are the team that wants to give him that opportunity to grow is sort of up to Winnipeg. But if Arniel is interested in maybe getting that 5 to 10% better and he wants to do it internally, it might not be a bad idea to promote Barron in the preseason and see what he's capable of. I've always wondered what Barron could do, maybe alongside of Mark Scheifele. Maybe Barron could become that Andrew Kopp sort of winger, somebody who's like a really stabilizing presence and allows you to make 3 really balanced, dangerous lines. I'm not saying that that's the best way to do it, but I wouldn't mind seeing what it looks like at least before the regular season starts. When you have some time for experimentation, guys like Barron who have seemingly untapped offensive potential, that's where you really want to make your bread and butter and try to internally improve. We know that Lambert and Chibrikov are likely to have pretty successful rookie seasons. Barron's an established NHL veteran at this point, relatively speaking, hasn't played a ton of games, but I still think that there is more to him than just a grindy, forechecky fourth liner. There's some legit skill there, and he might actually be able to keep up with Winnipeg's top 6. Again, this is forecasting and projecting a lot and making a lot of assumptions. But if you're looking for a way to perhaps prepare yourself for the inevitable departure of Nikolai Ehlers, and you're not sure about having Lambert in the top 6 necessarily, well, Barron might be an interesting appointment. I think that there is a player there. He has shown that he can actually skate pretty well. He still has some decision-making issues and things that I think hold him back just a bit. But again, if you're trying something in preseason where there's no real penalties, I wouldn't mind seeing if Barron has a little more to his locker. He only played like 10 and a half minutes last season and still scored 11 goals. There's very few players out there who are doing something like that, unless you're talking about super talents like Cole Perfetti. And really, there's just not many depth players doing something like this that are still in that bottom 6 role. So again, I think he's got something to offer. He's definitely a hardworking player. He's something of a fan favorite with some folks, and I could see him really making a case to earn more ice time as he starts to push through the season. I think the Jets adding that extra layer of tertiary scoring and actually recognizing when it's sitting there in their ranks, that is how stats analysis and some of this deeper level information can really help improve the Jets without having to go for a big slam dunk trade or, some big signings. Not that those don't help you, and I think they actually should use some of that at least, but, this is a chance where you can really prove that when you're making roster assessments and you're looking at the on-ice impacts, you're coming away with the right conclusions. And Barron getting a promotion might be one of those ways to demonstrate that they're looking at somebody with some perhaps untapped potential. I just hope that David Gustafsson also shows that untapped potential. He is a player I'm very fond of. I know that it hasn't always connected for him, but if there is somebody that I would say is really fun to watch, Barron and Gustafsson certainly fit that mold, and I hope that they stick around with Winnipeg for the foreseeable future. But let me know what you think of Barron and similar players of his caliber. Do you think that there's some untapped potential there? Are you expecting him to maybe get a promotion at some point, or do you think he is probably destined to play in the bottom 6? Let me know in the comments below or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Winnipeg Jets your first listen of the day. For your second listen, please enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I thank you so much for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.